Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Survey says, and this one is about Daniel Dubois. So ahead of his interim title fight with Bogdan Dinu, which has been announced for June, before that was announced, I asked you, the dust has long settled on Daniel Dubois' first career loss. The question now, can he bounce back and deliver on the promise and rebuild to become an eventual heavyweight champion? So the results are in. So this poll was up for just about 2 weeks. Just over 2,000 of you voted. So if you missed that vote, you can still go to the community tab and the poll is there, just like some other polls that have recently run. So 2,100 plus votes, 73 comments, 65 likes. Come on, guys, get the likes up a little bit more, please. But the majority say Daniel Dubois can rebuild. He can become an eventual heavyweight champion. So 23% believe that no, he cannot. And 21% are undecided. So actually, this is a reasonable sort of cross-section, in terms of what people have picked. But clearly coming out on top, though, is that there is more optimism from more than half of you that voted that Dubois can become a champion. And I'll run through just a cross-section of comments from the poll, because there really is some good comments there and some good food for thought. And then I'll get into a few thoughts of my own. But in terms of some of the stuff that you guys were saying in regards to the poll, the question about Daniel Dubois, here's one from Will. Not once did he work on technique in any of his fights. He was all about trying to impress with KOs. And when he came up against a decent opponent, he was found wanting. He has a lot of work to do. Fish here says he's given himself every chance by moving forward with Mark Tibbs. It'll be an interesting journey. And I'll come to that Tibbs point a little bit later on with my thoughts. So Joe M says, think he can with the right trainers and fights. Frank put him in way too early with an experienced Joyce. Needed to build him up gradually. He went from bums to European/world level. And certainly the building of Daniel Dubois has been something that, even ahead of the fight, a lot of people were talking about. We were saying, some of the opponents, the cannon fodder had been fed. Was it really the appropriate sort of building fights and experience that he needed, jumping up to face Joe Joyce? In retrospect, obviously the answer was no, he didn't have the right fights. But, we could see that coming from a mile away. So I will get to the Dinu stuff a little bit later on, because I think, even though Frank Warren seems to have pulled a blinder there, getting a title on the line somehow, coming off a loss, Dinu's not a bad opponent for Dubois to return against. So Demo says, for me, it all depends on his eye. He has a lot of talent and potential, but if this injury crops up again, it could cut his career short, and I'll talk about that too. Oliveira says DDD is still young. He will come back. Punch's chance says he will become a champion. Whether he lives up to his hype is another question. Even Charles Martin became champion, so it's not beyond anyone. Luckily for him, he has time on his hands. All depends on what the next generation brings. And Ben says, if he recovers from the eye injury, which is no given, recovers psychologically and can improve a little, then yes, he can become a champion. And I'll just quickly get through a few more. So True 2022 says, the jury will be out for a while for me. Have to say, I question his heart. Hope he proves me wrong. Salty Sally says, the eye injury might plague him forever. And we'll just sort of end here on Waylo saying, and this is an interesting point, he should have gone to the Olympics and not bothered with Frank Warren. I think his career is finished before it's even started. Not seen no real improvements in him. Matchmaking for him has also been toss. And that point, I guess that's where we'll pick it up, about Dubois, opting to turn pro at, 19 or 20. He decided to turn over in 2017, not go for the Olympics, which I guess in hindsight, maybe you can make a case because of everything that's happened. The Olympics were postponed a year. If he was to come out of the Olympics this year, he would have been 23, 23 and a half, whatever. So, ultimately it is what it is now. But I guess what could have been, had he have stayed in the Team GB system, potentially he would have been vying for gold in Tokyo in the Summer Games. But we'll never know now what sort of amateur record he could have forged, because obviously he had a limited sort of tranche of fights in the amateurs. But certainly, you know, in the pros, he's been developing. But would that have been the same in the amateurs to the same degree? I mean, hard to know. But yeah, I think a lot of people would have liked him to have stayed amateur. But well, that's in the past now. But in terms of the eye injury, I can understand why 21% of people are basically sort of saying we're going to take a wait and see approach. And I think the eye injury probably factors into that somewhat, because we've seen with a guy like Kell Brook, not only did he have one orbital bone broken, but he had the other one broken. So, I mean, it's a question. I mean, that was from a jab. Is he damaged goods? I mean, this is part of the reason I think some people have picked, you know, 21% of you, that we need to wait and see, because the next couple of years, well, we're certainly going to see his development. You know, is he going to be Rebound? Is he going to keep developing? Is he going to under Mark Tibbs, his new trainer? And this is, I guess, a good segue point, because Tibbs, we saw with Dillian Whyte over the course of a number of years, he did manage to really bring Whyte along. And I guess in the case with Dillian Whyte, there was always still a little bit of recklessness, raggedness with Whyte, but that was something that Mark Tibbs obviously decided, you know, that's part of his game. Because when we saw him trying to box a bit sharper under Xavier Miller, he was able to do it, Dillian Whyte, but there was something that you thought, had he lost something? I don't know, with the sort of aggression, you know, the way that he was physically manhandling opponents and being rough and rugged. Didn't see that in that first Povetkin fight. So, I mean, I think Mark Tibbs, and I say all that to say this, he is going to work on Daniel Dubois, but not necessarily completely change him. He's going to try accentuate his best elements of his boxing game, but also he's going to try to minimize some of those deficiencies. And I think clearly head movement is going to be something that we need to sort of see, because if he can't move his head, he's going to get hit often. And obviously, you know, if he has dodgy eyes, which we're still to see if he recovers from this, can he be hurt again in that region? Certainly moving his head is going to go a long way to avoiding some of those punches, because you can't just block punches with your face, because it doesn't work out. And when he got hit with a jab and it sort of busted up his face, wow. And another comment that I'll just go back to, so True 2022 had mentioned about questioning his heart, and that is a theme that I do see running through different comment threads where Dubois is mentioned. My recent video against Bogdan Dinu, that you know, because he did ultimately quit, he did the right thing to sort of save his eye. He was obviously in pain, couldn't really see out of it. He still had a few rounds to go in that fight, and it was probably starting to look from his position, you know, just a really untenable sort of position to be in. That should he stay in there, who knows what could have happened. Could have had a real serious permanent injury. But just 6 months later, he's going to be getting back into training camp for a fight in June 2021. So when you think about it, I mean, on the face of it, I think he made the right call, but I have seen a lot of people saying that he quit, that they do question his heart, and that when things got tough, did he quit? That certainly is something that people have been, you know, dropping about Daniel Dubois since the loss. And of Bogdan Dinu, and yes, you know, probably the WBA interim title shot, you know, shouldn't be on the line, and it's a ridiculous belt to begin with, because there's no reason to have it. The champions in the WBA are available. It's sanctioning fees, it's prestige, it's, you know, marketing. They can say a world title on BT, but just put all that to the side for a moment. Bogdan Dinu is an appropriate, you know, comeback level fight for Daniel Dubois. He's good enough to the point where he can be a test of sorts, but ultimately Dinu himself, who seems to have heart issues, when things get tough, he sort of quits. You know, I think Daniel Dubois for the first few rounds of that fight will be tested by a slightly awkward style matchup by a guy who's about the same height or a little taller, who's got a good jab, who can box and move, but ultimately will probably get hit and hurt and taken out. But it's actually, and this is a point I failed to mention in that video announcing that fight with Dinu, it's a much better fight than I expected. I wasn't really expecting much in the return. I thought he may have some cannon fodder, you know, for a couple of fights. So maybe you could even argue this is a step above where I think a lot of people thought he probably would sort of re-enter the heavyweight division. So from that point of view, to have the confidence to go into that level of fight, which ultimately is pretty much better than most on his resume anyway. And I guess some people will say, well, that's not hard. But still, he's got to get in there. He's got to, go to work and do the job. And I guess with BT, etc., they probably have expectations that if Dubois is headlining, it's not just going to be against cannon fodder because, we've been there, done that, got the postcard, and they probably don't like some of the ratings for some of the fights where he was headlining against guys that were way below, the level for a main event. But Dinu and Dubois, with the interim title on the line, it makes sense for TV for Frank Warren, and Warren's really done a blinder. Coming off a loss, somehow managed to get his title shot. You've got to give Frank Warren some credit for that. But recapping, so the vote was in from this poll. People think 56% of those who voted that Daniel Dubois can become an eventual heavyweight champion. 44% were split between no and also undecided. So there really is a spectrum of views about Dubois and where he's at, where he's going, and what he can ultimately do in the division. Let me know in the comments. Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.